Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just not even a couple minutes, like maybe 1 minute, because I'm seeing some people coming in, which is so thrilling and exciting to me. So Hero's going to welcome you all in for a moment, and we're going to get started. Everyone say hi to Hero, please. This is Hero. She's my writing partner. This is me. I'm Preston. I'm also my writing partner. That was very diminishing of my actual writing partner, Jessica Kokoska, who is incredible. Hero wishes she had such a grip on brilliance of book writing and dramaturgy. Oh my gosh, there are so many people who are joining. Thank you so much for coming to this probably fairly brief, depending on your questions, discussion of how to build a new musical, kind of 101, especially as a new writer or a young writer, especially a high school aged writers. I'm going to be talking about how I started in high school and kind of picked up tools along the way to write musicals. So I'm feeling great about the number of people that are streaming in. So I want to, I'll introduce myself a little bit more thoroughly. My name is Preston Max Allen. I'm here at the Johnny Mercer Grove at Goodspeed, well actually in Chicago, holler, Chicago. But virtually to work on Agent 355, my musical with Jessica Kokoska, as previously shouted out at. And I do a lot of musical writing. Most probably known-ishly, I did a musical called We Are the Tigers. I did book music and lyrics for that. It's an original story about a cheerleader team who is having their annual sleepover, and they're hoping to have a better year than their last year, which went pretty badly, and unfortunately some of them get murdered at that sleepover, and they have to solve the murders, and they're not very good at it, and it's kind of about that journey. That album is on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon, and all that. That was off-Broadway in 2019, and we're hoping to get it licensed for like colleges and high schools and all that as soon as possible, so that you can do it too. It was originally written for high schools and colleges and regional theaters to do. So let's start there. How do you write a musical? Well, there is actually no answer. I took some notes, so I'm going to be glancing at them. My first question is, do you have a story that you want to tell? Do you have a song in your heart? Heart the thing if you have a song in your heart. No, okay, well, if no one has a song in their heart, I'm still going to talk to you as if you do. Okay, well, in theory, you have an idea, or you have a character, or you have a feeling. You're like, hey, I'm angry and I want to kind of figure out what to do with that, or I'm really happy and I want to figure out what to do with that. And maybe you have played instruments, maybe you haven't. So you start to get an idea of, this is something I want to do. I want to write a musical. I want to venture into this world. And there's a lot of ways to do that. So you can start by writing an outline. If you have enough of an idea of what you're doing, you can start jotting down characters and themes or plots, or you can do what I do, which is I kind of start from a character place. So let's use tigers. For my musical, We Are the Tigers, I thought I was in high school at the time, and I was in a program that had a lot of really, really talented young women. And I wished there was a musical that my school could do that had a lot of roles for young women, because we did shows that tend to have equal casts, or honestly like more roles for men. We were like, well, that's not quite how our program skews. So that was where I started. I was like, I would love to see this. So that's a great place to start. You have to want to love or really want to see the show that you're going to write. So for me, it was a show about high schoolers that high schools could do. So I thought I would like to see that. So I started kind of percolating, and I was like, what are my interests? I really love punk rock music. I really love Green Day. I really love Fall Out Boy. To this day, I really love all of those things. So I started kind of starting from there. And I really love horror. I really love teen horror, that kind of scary Scream 4 is a big influence for Tigers. Pretty Little Liars was on at the time, because that is the age I am. And that was a really big influence. I'm like, okay, punk rock music, horror, teen horror, and a musical that young people, especially young women in high school programs, can do. Young women and young people. There's a couple characters in Tigers who I don't want to restrict their gender identity. So that was where I started. And honestly, it was really messy for several years. And that's kind of the thing that I want to bring home, is you're not going to write your show perfectly, right off the bat. You're definitely going to, it's a very long road with a lot of bumps in it. And sometimes you have to pull over and change a tire, or all your tires, or wait for a new car to pick you up. But as long as you are on that journey, it will hopefully conclude with a show that you feel really happy with over probably a couple years of development. So that was the start of that show. For me, what I really like to do is kind of set my characters up to talk to each other. So I'll start with a scene, or I'll start with a monologue, or some sort of like things that won't even end up in the show. Characters having conversations about things that I'm curious about how they would connect to each other, and I think maybe it will be in the show, but it doesn't ultimately end up in the show. So a good example is if you are familiar with Tigers, which I think some of you might be because I summoned you from my page. There used to be a scene in Tigers that I had kind of free written where Chess and Farah talk about their struggles with addiction, and they kind of bonded over their want to heal. And it was a really moving scene, and I really enjoyed writing it, but it ultimately wasn't conducive to the plot of the show. And I really loved seeing those characters connect like that. It meant a lot to me, but that's something that I get to hold on to. So I think that's an important thing to realize as you're writing, especially a musical, because when you're engaging with music, there's going to be a lot more, not more necessarily, but you're digging into a really emotional place to be able to get your characters to sing. So it's kind of easy to feel pretty married to everything you do. And that's probably the longest process I have, is really kind of separating away from that marriage. So writing scenes and putting those away I always have like We Are the Tigers and then We Are the Tigers parts is kind of always what I have for all my shows when I'm working like that. So just kind of writing through things. I always say, and often in residencies, not in this one, thankfully, but in residencies, sometimes I spend all the time working really hard on these songs or these moments that don't stay in the show. So you have to write through what is not going to stay in the show to be able to find what is, and to be able to find really special moments where your characters connect, or where you finally find that really incredible song. Sometimes you have to write through a couple songs that you're like, oh, I like that, but it's not quite right, or ooh, that was 100% not right, and I don't want to listen to it either. But it's really important to be okay with those moments, and to accept that those moments are really normal, and they're a really big part of your process. And if you do knock it out at the first try, if you sit down to write a song about a student studying for the SATs and you write the most incredible SAT song ever, that's awesome, but be careful about going into the next song thinking you're going to knock it out like that. I get into that trap sometimes where I'll write one song and feel like really successful, and then I'll write the next song and I will feel a little bit crunchy. And I just try to remember that every process is different. So yeah, that's I think the biggest thing that I wanted to communicate when I'm asked this question is it's so important to write for yourself before you're writing for other people. It's so important to develop the depth of your characters and the humanity of your characters in drafts and in scene work and in song work, that you get to know really well, so that you have a really strong foundation of who you're creating, of the people that you're bringing into the world and how they connect and communicate. And then from there, to focus on a little bit more of the logistical things, I am of the school of you don't have to play an instrument to write music. You can sing a melody in the shower, and that is as valid as something that has been written with a ton of instruments and like full production quality. And then, you can take that melody you wrote in the shower and record it on your phone. And maybe at one point you learn a couple chords on the guitar and you add those to it. I think of it kind of like a video game where you're running along with your idea or whatever tools you start with, which could be not having written a story or not having written a song, and you collect, I learned a chord on guitar coin, and then you learn, I learned 3. And you're like, I wrote a scene I really like, and I think that's going to stay in the show, and you collect that coin. And then sometimes you hit a wall and you kind of start with a video game. You might die and you start a new life. You start back at the beginning, but you know a lot of the tools to get yourself farther and farther and farther and farther. So I think of that kind of as how musical writing works. Is the journey is long, and sometimes there are setbacks, but the more and more tools you gather, the more and more you know about the future of your writing. Even if, honestly, you write an entire show, and that show only kind of really exists to teach you how you write and what you want in your next piece. So to me, I say, if you can't write sheet music, don't be scared. If you don't know music theory, don't be scared. I took one semester of music theory in college and got scared. And then I thought, I'm not a real composer. I can't write sheet music. I'm not a real composer. I don't know how to play piano very well. I can't accompany myself in concerts. That's all not true at all. And I want to say that loudly and proudly. You are as much a songwriter as anyone if you are doing your best to communicate your music. And there are incredible people who are orchestrators and who are arrangers who are going to help you out with that, and who are going to use their incredible talents to complement your talents, and you'll hopefully come up with a really full sound that you're all really proud of. That brings me to collaboration. Collaboration is very important. When I was younger, I thought that if I didn't write book music lyrics, it wasn't like my show. And what I've learned that the my show mindset is actually pretty harmful for your musical. It's important to take in, especially like in early stages, the feedback that you're receiving, and get to know what's helpful to you and what's not. So instead of, I think being offended by feedback that seems really challenging, sometimes there's a nugget of useful information in that feedback, and you can grab that nugget and say, okay, I learned from that. And sometimes you look at the whole thing and you're like, that's actually not helpful. But you'll find more and more collaborators who will ask you a really interesting question about your piece, or who will be really interested in a theme and then point out maybe how it's not as followed through as it could be, or challenge you to kind of push yourself a little further. And if you find people like that, which are important to find to develop your piece, then you really start to form lifelong, really important collaborations of people who are going to challenge and influence your work and be a really big part of building it and telling the story that you want to tell with their special talents. So you bring what you've got to the table, they'll bring what they have. But what's really important is that, especially as a young artist or a new artist, that no one is trying to diminish you for your greenness, if you will. That no one is trying to, treat you like a young writer or treat you any less than any other professional in a room. You're as much a professional as someone who's been working in the industry for years and years and years. The important thing is, of course, to be respectful, and of course to be professional, but you should be receiving that right back. If you give respect, you should be treated respectfully, and that is what you are owed. If anyone tries to act like young artists are not owed respect and professionalism and clear communication at every point, that is not healthy. And as safely as you can address that or work through that or get out of it or seek help with that, spaces that abuse your talent and your emotional energy are fairly common, and they really hurt. They can really hurt the beautiful work that you're trying to make by having people who are not treating you like the artist that you deserve to be treated like. So that said, I mean, it can sometimes, a really hard experience can make it difficult to want to keep working. But there are really special artists and really incredible spaces that are going to show you the kind of way that you should be treated and show you the kind of collaborations that you should be having. And so if something doesn't feel safe or doesn't feel healthy, that's not the way it should be. That's not the way you should be treated, and that's not the way that this business should work. So that's very important to remember. I want to talk a little bit, about taking care of yourself. Nothing is more important than your mental and physical health while telling a story. If you we are encouraged, I think, especially in programs, to be really emotional and be really vulnerable and share the deepest parts of ourselves. And that is not, that's not how everyone works. And sometimes, especially theater education programs that encourage that kind of behavior, don't also educate on the fact that while being that vulnerable or while trying to explore more difficult moments in your life, you should really be taking really good care of yourself and only be exploring those moments when you are comfortable with it and when you are surrounded by people who are supporting you, and not like a teacher or an educator yelling at you that if you didn't cry like the last student, that your art isn't successful. That is absolutely the opposite of how it should be. I mean, if you have access to therapy as an artist, I think that is really important. I think that college programs should emphasize mental health care much more than they emphasize, breaking yourself into pieces to tell a story. If you start to feel, I think that you're really losing track of yourself as you're telling a more emotional journey, it's really important to check in. I used to have that kind of mindset of, if I'm not, sobbing at the computer, I'm not really feeling it. And what was really happening was, if I was getting that emotional, I didn't have the perspective that I needed to clearly tell my story. So what I was kind of taught in a few avenues was really valuable for emotional storytelling. It was actually clouding my perspective, because it was encouraging me not to take care of my health and my safety. It was encouraging me to lay it out on the line and be vulnerable. And that's important to do only when you are in safe spaces where you feel really protective and you have aftercare tools and you can wind down and you can take care of yourself. So that is a big part of what I want to emphasize, because no matter how wonderful your storytelling is or how talented you are, how hard you're working, if you're not surrounded by people who are encouraging your health and your safety, they're not taking care of you and your art. And this is the long game. This is not, you need to be taking care of yourself for the whole duration of this career, if this is what you want to be in. So I am going to, it sounds very negative, but I'm very excited for people for hopefully educational programs, especially to start implementing that kind of awareness of self-care and pairing that with, the acting education that we're more familiar with, which can be a little more traumatic. So those are kind of the core things. I just wanted to kind of address that, you don't need to know any music theory or anything, but it is important to be really open to growth and to be, for me, I like to learn by playing songs. So I learned guitar by playing Green Day. I was really, I'm very enthusiastic about that sound. I really want to recreate it. I was really energized. I didn't have a lot of success learning music with I had a great piano teacher, but I wasn't engaged in kind of the basics of piano lessons. I wasn't kind of engaged in that. But when I started finding and learning music that I really wanted to play, it really excited me about learning more and more. So it felt less like, I'm going to go practice piano, and more like, I'm going to go play through this Regina Spektor song that I just found sheet music for. That was kind of how I learned. Guitar was Green Day and piano is Regina Spektor and musical theater books and stuff like that. That excites me, that challenges me, that is what pushes me, and that's how I absorb my education. So while I don't necessarily know what key signatures my music is often, my imagination has a lot of fun running with sound and running with all sorts of different approaches to rhyme, which can be controversial. But I think, lyricism especially is poetry, and it's really personal. And as long as you are intentional about the ways in which you're kind of bending those rules, which I don't love to use for songwriting, and you're creating a sound that you're really proud of and that you feel is full of your heart, then I think that is great. And as you go along, as you hear what you sound like when you're enjoying playing your music and enjoying writing your art and writing conversations where you feel like you're really capturing your characters and you're really capturing the situations, then getting into that outline stage is very helpful at that point, and starting to really map out the story that you're going to tell, kind of scene by scene. I don't actually, outlining is newer for me, and I really recommend it. I sometimes will free write the play, which what that does is I can actually, I learn through how the characters are communicating, and that's really valuable for me, but it takes a lot of time. So now I'm a little bit more into outlining and then picking scenes from that outline that I want to detail, and then going through and doing the whole thing. And I really believe in and I think this is probably fairly common, which is writing out of order. If you feel really energized about the end of your show and you want to write that scene out, go ahead and write that scene out, and then understand that you might have written a beautiful and extraordinary scene where the characters connected and it felt so right. And then when you have filled in the rest of your show, you might be in a completely different place, and you might have realized and found that there are so many different conversations that happened and so many different themes that came up that you do need to address in your finale. So being able to say, wow, I started with this beautiful scene. I have a few more of these scenes that were, from the earlier stages that I'm so connected to, that feel like a really huge part of my project. But through the development process, those parts of the show that felt so formative and those songs that felt so connected, maybe don't actually serve the overall new piece, the full version of this piece that came from these seeds, and have kind of surpassed where they are. And then hopefully at that point you feel so connected to your story that you are able to finish it out even more specifically stronger than that scene that you started with. And you look back fondly at that beautiful scene and you say, this is how it started. And the next time, maybe that'll be the same way it works. And I'll find that one incredible scene that I feel so good about, and it will inspire the project, but it won't necessarily live in the project, which, if anyone here is familiar with Tigers, there's a lot of songs like that. Everybody Wants to Be Her was a really big part of the show. Everybody Wants to Be Her is one of the opening numbers of Tigers, and it was, the girls were really struggling to communicate, and that song kind of was about their clashes with each other. And it was a really poppy song. They were all kind of judging each other via music and all kind of like side-eyeing each other, and you could kind of see that this was an uncomfortable relationship for everyone. What we realized with that show is that the book contained a lot of that information. The book contained a lot of that distrust. And what we really craved in that moment was getting to know the characters. We really craved what they were thinking. Not what they were thinking about each other, but their experience, which manifested in the song that currently lives in the show, which is Don't Even. And so, my brother was so devastated that we were taking Everybody Wants to Be Here out, because musical theater development is long. And that was one of the first songs in the show. I'd written that song when I was like 19. It was a hugely formative way in how I determined their relationships and how I figured out how they emotionally were connected. And then when it came down to it, to leave it, I said, this served the show at a certain point. I'm so glad people really liked it, but I hope that they feel the new levels that we've reached through development, through these characters. And I do think we've had success with that. My brother gave the song his approval, and I think the first preview was very nervous for him to see it, but he did. And I think that it really has helped people get to know the characters. And then there's, discussion of like, oh, why was it cut? We miss it so much. And sometimes you just have to know those things, and you can't explain to everyone why you made those choices. There's another character in the show who once had a love song basically to a character within the show. And that was really important to me, especially as a young queer person. I really wanted to explore the queerness of some of my characters in that way. And what it turned out was ultimately those emotions were felt, I think, by the character, but the song didn't serve the motor of the show. And I'm glad that people have found it, and I'm glad that people can see that the character has experienced those things. But partially that character has moved on from some of those emotions too. And sometimes you learn that with a character too. You start with them in one place and you realize, hey, actually, when I started writing this piece, they were in love with their friend. But now I'm in a place where actually I realize how badly their friend has hurt them their whole lives. Yes, it is 8th grade. And then that works in both ways for that relationship. And now that character actually wants to address, hey, I'm being ignored by this friend, or hey, I was in love with this friend, but now I'm not being treated very well, or I have this guarded emotion that's going to keep me from expressing this based on the circumstances that arose while you were writing it. So yes, sometimes people will be like, oh, I really wish that song was back in, or I don't really know why it was cut. And I think sometimes only you can know those things. And there are shows of mine where I cut a song because it didn't seem to serve it, and then I just felt that the song was so intrinsically a part of the show that I did put it back in. And sometimes we'll fight to put those things back in, and sometimes I know where they are, and as a collaborator sometimes I will stop and say, hey, I know this song does not 1,000% serve this moment, but I've really thought about it, and it is really, really important to me that it stays in the show. It feels like it's part of the bones of the show, and I really need it to stay in. So that's a little bit more further into the development of your piece. But I do think it's important to have that kind of perspective where you're really paying attention to editing in a way that you're being, whether or not it breaks your heart, pretty clear about stuff you love but doesn't serve your show, stuff you love but does serve your show but maybe isn't necessary, and stuff that you cannot part with. It will just break your heart. And then there's the next level of someone kind of telling you that you have to part with it. And then you have that conversation, but that's way down the line. So I encourage young artists to start at any level and to just not get discouraged by the editing process, and to be excited about change. I think that's my biggest takeaway, is be excited about the changes you're going to make. Tigers has an entirely different score. Tigers has an entirely different album. There were 6 other characters. I wrote it that was between the development of 17 and 20. It was just an entirely different thing. It was much more campy. It was much more chorusy and classic kind of in its structure. And that I thought, hey, this can go to Broadway. Why can't this go to Broadway? And then, I got to sit more with it and really think about what I wanted out of it, which was a more intimate story, which was more character connection, which was more depth of character. But it took writing through everything that I thought would be really exciting, and it turns out was just a helpful exercise. And then also there's going to be a lot of rejection in the industry, and you'll do a reading and no one will buy your piece, or you'll submit to a bunch of opportunities and no one will come back with offers for you. And that's tough. That doesn't not hurt. I think there's kind of no way to be like, oh, just, the next thing. I think to say, hey, I really wanted that sucked. But also to say at the same time, it's not a reflection on your talent at all. Sometimes they'll give you notes back and there's some really valuable things. There's also sometimes some stuff where you're like, okay, we just really weren't on the same page about the vision of this. But if you can see those rejections as not a reflection on your work and your energy and your motor, keep making art and music that you love, that you love listening to, that you care about the characters of, that you care about the journey of, that you want to see from beginning to end, that when you listen back to the playlist you've written, whether it's a bunch of voice memos on your phone or fully realized demos, and for me, it went from voice memos to over 10 years. Now I use Logic and I actually plug my instruments in and orchestrate them, but it took 10 years for me to get to that place. I collected enough of my tools and my coins, and I learned enough about how I write to be able to expand on my sound, but it was at every level. It was really different, and it was really bare bones at sometimes, and the people I met encouraged me to expand or help me build my sound. That was all a part of a very long journey that just always starts with sitting down and saying, it is important to me to figure this story out, to tell this story, but also to figure this story out in a really fulfilling, sometimes complex, sometimes really difficult way. Sometimes you put a story away for a year or 5 years and pick it up later, and it broke your heart because you thought you were going to work on it. You thought it was going to be your big break. It didn't work out. And then 5 years later, you pick it up and you say, oh my gosh, I see this show differently. I see what it needs. I see how I can help it. I see these characters in a new way. Maybe I see them how this person who I really thought we were connecting, but I wasn't quite understanding their notes, and I really believed in their perspective. Maybe now I'm returning to this project and I really see what they were saying, and now we're totally in line and we can totally move forward with this piece. That the 5 years between that can be a little heartbreaking, but find the next story. If one gets tired, it gets exhausting for you, or one you love gets too difficult, to kind of pick up after a few rejections, write a new song, discover a new character in the meantime, but never lose hope that the characters that you built and the stories you told when you were younger or as you're growing, or that challenged you or that you put away or that stressed you out, that they will always be there. You can always come back to them, and only with more perspective can you create a healthier piece. So that is, I think, all my music writing 101. It was pretty general. But also, yeah, I just want to reiterate to those of you who joined after that, taking care of yourself and always making sure that you're that you're involved and you're engaged, but you're a little bit removed so you can have health and clarity and perspective is really important. All of that theater education, if you're not crying, it's not working stuff, I do not believe in. And I believe that if those moments are happening, they should be with people that you feel really taken care of, in a space that feels really safe, with aftercare plans to make you feel really good. So if you're going to do that kind of work and you've all agreed you're going to do that and take care of each other, maybe you're going to go out afterwards and hydrate a little, or have a bite to eat, or see a movie, something, or watch a TV show you love, something that you're making sure that you're helping yourself down from those really emotional moments, and surrounded by people that are not pushing you too hard. There's definitely a difference between encouraging you to do your best work, sometimes under a deadline, sometimes under a lot of stress, and pushing you too hard. And setting unattainable goals just to stress you out, just to put you in the highest gear so that you'll generate content. You won't generate as healthy content if it's, pedal to the metal, and not, hey, let's see what you can do. Let's get really excited about what you can do. I have a big belief in collaborators who encourage from a place of health and positive energy and positive support, and I think that's kind of the full scope. That is the 30-minute recap of my feelings on musical theater. And I'm teaching a class on it this summer, and the information has not come out yet. It's a 4-course, a 4-week thing where we're going to be building an original plot and kind of working through that together, and discussing more the structure and where songs go and why, and what kind of characters sing and how they sing, and how to use whatever tools you have at that time to make a full musical, because whatever tools you have, you are absolutely able to write that draft and go from there and find more tools along the way. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm so glad that Instagram Lives make me very nervous. So now I feel like I said many things, hopefully some of which people found valuable. If you didn't, that's okay. Maybe I told you everything you didn't want to hear, and in that you found what you wanted to hear. And isn't that beautiful? Great. This will probably live in perpetuity on their Instagram Live page for as long as they want it to. But before we part ways, let's say goodbye to my beautiful and wonderful cat. I think that we should do that. Oh my gosh, she's sleeping and she's perfect. Her name is Hero. She's a big part of my self-care toolbox when I'm feeling crappy and I need to remember that life is actually just a soft cat on a blanket. Here she is. Oh, I have a question. Let's answer that question. Here, do you want to answer it? Any tips on how to make your lyrics seem more conversational and more like natural? To me, that's just a matter of rewriting. So I think that if you sit down, you're like, I'm going to write a song that's what I think this sounds like, and you write it and you listen back, you record it however you record, listen back to it. I always go for like a walk when I have a new demo and I'm like, I see what I really like about this. I see where I really, really want to improve, but it's kind of only through writing what I think it should be that then I actually can sit back and hear what I want out of it. So for conversational lyrics, that's actually really tough for me. I want everyone to sing like Spring Awakening style stop and sings. So that usually takes me a few times. But for IDK and Tigers, I was asked to, it was originally a scene and I was asked to musicalize it. And I actually I went back and realized the other day that I actually just set music largely to what was just the lines of dialogue. So that's a method too, which is write the scene and then start to kind of set that scene to music and then shape the rhyming or the speaking patterns, the kind of funky fun you can have when you do that kind of stuff, with the shape of just the scene work that you did. So I hope that works for you. Or maybe that won't, and you will find the method that does, and it'll be incredible. But yeah, recording and listening back is really, really helpful for me. Even if it's just me like making dinner and being like, oh, I want to howl like ooh into my phone. I go back and I listen and I'm like ooh, and I'm like, oh, actually I want like ooh. My voice is not warmed up today, so I was really nervous about that. But I'm like, oh, I crave that note. I'm listening to it and I thought I was right, but I crave this. And then you can go back because you're the writer and be like, yeah, I'm gonna add that in. Which you can do all the way up until, I guess your show is licensed to being done by people and you can't stop that from happening. And even then you can do a UK production and change some stuff. So that is that. What are some of the, I'm very excited about this. My biggest inspos, I was literally, when I was younger, I was very, formed by Spring Awakening and Next to Normal. Those were my like high school, college shows. And, that punk sound, that deep depth of emotion, really influenced me into what I wanted to do with my work. When I was younger, I was very obsessed with the musical Chicago. I knew every word. I knew every word to Eponine. So I was kind of like, I love the craft. I love the form. I was really drawn to it. I listened to it a lot. But when I heard like Spring Awakening and Next to Normal, I really heard how my sound fit in to like a musical theater canon, how the stuff I was listening to actually was like being brought into that world. But actually mostly I do at this point not listen to musical theater very much. So my favorite artists who inspire me now are, of course, as mentioned, Regina Spektor, who's my tattoo is based on, and Green Day and Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance. I think Black Parade is the best album ever in the world. Kesha, K-Flay. I think Julia Michaels is an extraordinary songwriter that I've been listening to a lot lately. There's so many. Lizzo. Never a bad time to listen to Lizzo. I have a lot of 90s nostalgia playlists that I adore, that I turn on every morning and I dance around to my 90s nostalgia playlists. Music is definitely how I influence my mood. So if I'm feeling kind of crappy, I have a lot of playlists that are like, hey, you should put this on, maybe you'll feel better. So that's kind of the start of, there's another tool in the toolbox. Those are my biggest influences. Now I'm trying to think of, I also really, really love the music of The Last Ship. I think it's a really extraordinary example of someone who was not a musical theater writer necessarily, but fit the genre so well because of the depth of storytelling that like Sting has, and the clear passion behind telling that story. I think it became one of the most extraordinary musical theater albums that like clearly fits in the genre, but also fits in a really personal style. And I really want to see more of that. I really want to see more artists who don't necessarily think they are in musical theater, contributing their really personal styles to it. And I think some of that means that we want to deconstruct some of those structures that have been put in place. I think, there's definitely, a time and a place for perfect scansion and perfect rhyming, but some artists can find it really restrictive. And to kind of break free of that and look at these things like poetry and personal, and then shape them so that, there's cohesion in the listening process. I really want to see that. I really want to see a lot of writers from different genres hop into this and do some storytelling, which already happens in albums. So it should be pretty cool. I have so many more thoughts on so many different things, on like jukebox musicals and stuff like that, and how not to write for musical theater when thinking it will be easy. I think there are some artists who think it will be really easy to reproduce a musical theater score, and there's no such thing as a musical theater score. It is the music that supports a story, that supports the characters. There's no kind of specific frame for that. You can't really reproduce that without getting really connected to your story and your characters. Oh, Hero just snored. It was very, very cute. Hero, is it time to go? It's time to go. I wish you could see that this is truly a Texas Chainsaw Massacre blanket that a friend gave me as a gift, but now it is a cuddly cat blanket. Texas cuteness massacre. I'm going to go. I imagine this will live on the Instagram, on the live tab of this page. Also, I will be living on my Instagram, which is Preston Max Allen, and I do Q&As when I don't want to be doing the work I'm supposed to be doing. So if you have any more questions, if you have anything specific, you can hop over there. I'm not super, I'm very behind on my DMs, but whenever I do those Q&As, I will try to get to your questions. I hope you will all have a wonderful day and you get to relax because it is a most beautiful weekend, at least here in Chicago. And you get to do something you love and you get to talk to people you love. And if you're not having a great day, I hope you do a couple nice things for yourself that make you feel a little lighter than maybe you were earlier. So this is me and this is Hero, and we will see you soon.